Welcome to the first of my Master Duel deck profiles. If you're coming here for my regular deck profiles, it will be slightly different. Since there aren't really any new cards to showcase, I'll be starting off by giving a very brief summary of how the archetype works, before going over a bunch of cards that could be useful tech for the deck, and then showing you one or two variants of the deck itself, before showing you the deck in action in an actual duel. This time I'll be going over Witchcrafters, which won the poll I posted on YouTube. I'll probably be doing more polls like that in the future, so keep a lookout for those. By the way, the Patreon version of the poll had Dragon Maids win, so you'll be getting that soon. So, to give the very briefest summary on how the deck works, you basically have a bunch of low-level spellcasters that discard a spell to summon any other Witchcrafter from the deck. Usually that'll be used to summon Ver, a very smug defensive wall with a blanket monster negate, or Heiner, who is basically Spellcaster Trident in a Jotaro hat. They get to recover their spells if you use them for a discard instead of for their actual effects, meaning they're not completely hopeless when it comes to bleeding card advantage. Also, their low levels have graveyard effects, letting you send more stuff to then recover in the end phase, or just to copy the effects of a spell. Sadly, Konami had enough spell-based waifu decks after Sky Strikers, so instead of giving the spells a bunch of cool bonus effects, they made it so you have to choose between recovering them or actually getting to use them. And also, you only get them back during your end phase. It's pretty tragic, but at least you'll get some real satisfaction if you manage to beat a meta deck with this one. I guess that explains why Ver is so smug looking all the time. So when it comes to tech for this deck, you'll be looking for cards which either support spellcasters, or spells that benefit from being discarded. Most Witchcrafters also have graveyard effects, so cards that mill a bunch are fairly good too. So what you're seeing now isn't the actual Witchcrafter deck, don't worry. It's actually a collection of all the tech cards that you could use in this deck, so that I can go over them with you and you can see their rarities easily. Some stuff is more recommended than others, and some stuff only really works together. So don't just take this as an actual list, because there is some nuance here. So to start it off, let me talk about the Psyframe package, a card that can cover their biggest weakness. Now, as you probably know, you need to control no monsters to use this. Well, having one of these in hand actually protects your combo when it's at its most vulnerable. You see, if you tribute a low-level Witchcrafter and then get Ash Blossomed, you won't actually have any monsters on the field, so you'll be able to stop the Ash and get yourself a level 8 synchro in the process. It also has the advantage that the actual hand trap can't be special summoned by reasoning, so you're less likely to waste that effect, but we'll be getting to that soon. Sadly, it's only at 2 in this ban list, and you still need to run a normal monster to make use of it, which kinda prevents me from fully recommending this. Next up is Magician's Souls. Since you kinda want to discard spell cards in this deck, discarding 2 to draw 2 is actually pretty good. However, unless you have Witchcrafter Holiday in hand to revive something, you don't actually really want to run extra copies of Ver or Heiner just for this. Also, there isn't much you can actually do as the material on the field, since this deck is so bad at combos. It's an ultra rare, so I wouldn't really bother unless you plan on using it in another deck. Next one's a bit of a meme, but I'll be showing it in action later on in case you want to see how it actually works. I'm talking about Silent Magician. You see, all you need to do to summon her is tribute one spellcaster, so she's not very hard to summon, and in exchange you get a spell negate every turn, as well as 500 attack for every card in your hand, which works pretty well with your Witchcrafter spells adding themselves back to your hand in the end phase. Also, if she gets destroyed, you get to summon a 3500 attack beatstick straight from your deck, but by itself that's obviously not really enough synergy for this deck. That's where Silent Burning comes in. Discard this with a Witchcrafter, and then you can banish it to search Silent Magician. It's not really good enough to be worth it though, unless you really like Silent Magician, in which case it's one of the decks that can run that card the best. The next few are all about getting spells in the graveyard, or benefiting from doing that. Card Destruction basically draws you a new hand while discarding your own one, which can be good considering the graveyard effects you have, but also making your opponent do the same can be a problem. While Eldritch is running around, I would stay clear of this card. Reasoning, however, doesn't have that downside, and instead can mill a bunch of your deck before summoning another monster. It's one of your few ways of playing past an Ash Blossom, as well as getting both Ver and Heine on board, so I definitely recommend it, especially since you can play it at 3 in this ban list. Metal Phase Fusion can be discarded and then shuffled back into your deck to draw a card. It's pretty good, basically being an upstart goblin that also serves to pay your cost. You could send it with Foolish Burial Goods to get that draw, or instead send any Witchcrafter card to essentially search it in the end phase, or even just copy its effect with Jenny. This card is fairly versatile, but you can't always afford a card with delayed benefits such as this, so run it at your own risk. Another good target for a discard is Magician's Rest Stage. When sent to the graveyard, you can search a Magician's right or left hand, which are continuous spells which either negate a spell or a trap, depending on which one you use. Since Witchcrafters are a fairly slow deck, having a negate every turn with one of these is actually pretty useful. Finally, the extreme version of all this is that grass looks greener. Using this will hopefully mill all of the above cards and give you a ton of options going forwards with your turn. If you already have a grass deck, then try out a Witchcrafter version, because when you can get it all to work, it can be very fun. The downside is that you're less likely to start with your low level Witchcrafter monsters, so if you don't get grass either, you really won't be doing much at all. The draw power, Pot of Extravagance and Pot of Prosperity both work well. Extravagance will give you a bigger hand, but Prosperity will hopefully give you the exact card that you need. Just play whichever one you already have. Now if you want something that could potentially stop your opponent from playing, try Secret Village of the Spellcasters. If you control a Spellcaster, your opponent can't activate any spells, so this will help a lot with Sky Strikers or even Drytron. However, the downside is that if your spellcasters get destroyed, you won't be able to use spells yourself, which in turn locks you out of most of your recovery plays. It's strong when it works, but it's fairly risky. Finally, let me talk to you about Spell Chronicle. When you use it, you discard your entire hand and then banish 5 spells from your deck, which should be 5 Witchcrafter spells with different names. Then, if you can get Witchcrafter Patronus into the graveyard, either with Shmieta or Foolish Burial Goods, you can then add back all 5 of those spells you banished to your hand during the opponent's standby phase, giving you the kind of card advantage you need for this deck to really start snowballing. When you discard your hand, you can also use that to your advantage for stuff like Magician's Rest Stage as well, so it's not too much of a downside. You do need to change your ratios around using this card well, but I think it's worth it since you'll have a much higher chance of winning if you can resolve this. Finally, there's not too much to say about the extra deck, but since you're running Spellcasters, it's worth throwing in a Hulk and a Selene. Hulk can summon an Effect Veiler to climb up into a Selene, who can either climb up into an Access Code Talker, or use her effect to summon Ver or Heine from the graveyard or hand. It won't happen too often, but it's fairly strong when it does work. So those are some tech cards I think could be considered when building a Witchcrafter deck. Now I'll show you a version that I've had some success with, but make sure to play around with the cards I've mentioned since there's no single best way to play this deck. So here's my Witchcrafter deck. As you can see, besides the staples, there's actually only one ultra rare you need for this deck, which is a Ruru. That's one of the big advantages of making a Witchcrafter deck. You'll barely need to invest any ultra rare gems into building it, meaning that if you're making something that shares a lot of tech with this card, like Reasoning or Prosperity, it'll be an incredibly cheap deck for you to build. Sure, you could make it more expensive with Grass or stuff like Magician's Souls, but those aren't actually required to get this deck running the way it's meant to. I'll give a quick rundown of each card, although I won't dwell too long on the tech cards since I explained those in the intro. It's a Spell Chronicle build backed up by Reasoning, since both of those cards give you a much higher chance of actually doing something with this deck. With the 3 Prosperities, you'll probably hit one of those 2 cards, and then you can adapt the rest of your plays of that turn around it. As you can see, I run 1 Effect Veiler and 2 Ash Blossoms. The deck doesn't have a ton of room for hand traps, and Max C is a problem with this build, since you run Reasoning. If Reasoning hits Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler, you can at least make a Hulky Fibrax, but with Max C you essentially just wasted that card. I then run 3 Jenny, 2 Pitor, and 3 Shmieta. Pitor's effect is less useful, which is why it's only at 2, and Poterie isn't very good at all, so we don't play that one. Then one of each high-level Witchcrafter is usually enough, since if they get destroyed, you'll just use Witchcrafter Holiday next turn. An ideal board would be Ver and Heine with a Ruru in the hand, and then buy street on the field, and you basically don't want to draw any of your high levels in order to achieve that. You run 3 reasoning because it's our best way of playing through interruption, as well as ending on more than one monster. And then Metal Phase Fusion is here to try and mill with reasoning, or just to keep our hand the same size. Creation is at 3, usually used to search a Ruru, and then Holiday is their second best, which you run at 3 for recovery plays, or even just to combo off a bit more if you have enough spells in hand. Collaboration is at 1 just to be another Witchcrafter name to banish with Chronicles, but it also helps endgames a bit faster. The main play being boosting a monster's attack way up with Ver before attacking a monster, and then clearing the field before attacking again directly was the boosted attack. We've talked about Prosperity and Chronicles, so then there's the Magician's package, which is one of the best ways to get value out of reasoning and your discards. In some formats, negating traps isn't as good, but in an Eldritch format like this it does actually come up pretty often, so it's definitely worth running. Buy Street offers decent protection, as well as an emergency discard if you run out of cards in your hand, so it's usually what you'll be sending to the graveyard with Shmieta after making Heine or Ver. Not losing to a stray Raigeki is always nice after all, and it makes removing Ver quite a problem for some decks. Run a Call by the Grave to lose to Ash Blossom a bit less often. If you have a second one, you could probably replace a Metal Phase Fusion with it. Finally, Unveiling is another Witchcrafter name, and while it's supposed to protect you from hand traps, it's such a minus and card advantage that you don't really want to be doing that. Then to round it out, Patronus is a pretty good draw, but it's mostly here to send after using Spell Chronicles to get your +5. For your extra deck, don't overthink it too much since it's all just fodder for Prosperity. Artemis and Link Rebo are okay if you need a low-level Witchcrafter in the graveyard for some reason, while the rest are all situational things that probably won't come up. An advantage of them not really needing their extra deck is that, for stuff like Yixie's Festival, you can cut the entire extra deck, since Prosperity is banned in that anyway, but nothing else of value is. If you need a cheap deck that should work throughout the limited extra deck events, this is definitely an option. So that's an example of a Witchcrafter deck, so now let's see it in action. So since this is a Master Duels deck, instead of showing you combos, I'll be showing you a few games instead. For this first game, I want to show you an example of a successful hand. I start by activating Reasoning, and while my opponent didn't have an Ash Blossom, I had protection from it anyway thanks to Called By, so these combos should work even if they did. I hit the left and right hand instead of Magician's Vestiges, which is unfortunate, but at least I hit a few Witchcrafter cards in the process. I get a Jenny, who discards to summon a Ver, and then I can just normal summon Shmieta to get out a Heine. To complete what is basically a perfect Witchcrafter board, Jenny banishes herself to copy Creation, searching a Ruru, and Shmieta is banished to send a Buy Street so that I can play it in the end phase. With a set Call by the Grave and 3 spells added back in the end phase, I'm pretty well set up for the next turn. My opponent, however, just sets 3 back row and a monster before passing. Since Heine can only destroy face-up cards, there really isn't much I can do this turn. Since I drew Draping, I might as well use it to try and force out their back row, but instead they just let it resolve. After normal summoning the Pitor I drew for turn, going into the battle phase, I attack with her since I can just boost her attack anyway, but I can't do that on a direct attack, so this guarantees the most damage. Since I didn't know what I'm up against yet, it wasn't actually safe to put Ver into attack mode. I tried to use Pitor, but it gets Ash this time. I could negate it, but honestly, it wasn't really worth it since I already had all my boss monsters out, and all I really was trying to do was to get a Shmieta for more damage next turn. I get one anyway by using her graveyard effect, so it's all good. They don't seem to have enough monsters in their hand to play, instead just resetting all of their traps once again. Since I have it, I use Collaboration to give Heine 2 attacks, while stopping any potential battle traps they might have wanted to play. I also summon Shmieta to get lethal without putting Ver into attack mode, since Utopia Double is a pretty common tech in trap tricks. They use a trap hole, so I just dodged that with her effect, to which they chain a Torrential Tribute. That's fine because Buy Street protects them from destruction once per turn anyway, and so as a last resort, they use Lost Winds to half Heine's attack. That was a mistake though, since it let me summon a Ruru since it targets a spellcaster. And so, after adding Collaboration back to my hand was her effect, since I already used it this turn and wouldn't get it in the end phase, I can just go for game. So that was a replay using basically the same deck that I showed you. For this second game, here's one that uses a small Silent Magician engine, in case you were curious about that. I start by normal summoning Jenny, to which my opponent chains a Max C. That's not a good idea though, since I can just chain her effect to it, getting off my only special summon before Max C resolves, which is why I don't bother negating it. Since I discarded Rest Stage, I get a right hand which I play. After that, I just search a Ruru as creation, and then I get to search again thanks to Jenny's graveyard effect to get a Shmieta for next turn. Since I can't actually choose what to negate to his right hand, my opponent first wastes a Foolish Burial, knowing it'll be negated, before then going in with a Lightning Storm. I banish a Maxi just to stop them from using another one next turn. From there on, they start doing Tri-Brigade combos, but I guess they were afraid of Vest Blanket negate because they go into an access code talker, giving me no opportunity to respond to their effects. Sadly, this does mean I can't use a Ruru either, so I take a whole bunch of damage, but luckily it leaves their board looking pretty easy to take apart. For turn, I draw Silent Burning, which is a good discard for Shmieta. After getting a Heiner from Shmieta's effect, I can easily destroy the access code thanks to her effect. I can now banish Silent Burning to get a Silent Magician for next turn, and then banish Shmieta to send By Street, giving me a bit more protection next turn. I get in a little bit of damage before getting back an Unveiling to my hand and a By Street to the field. It's not an impressive board, but my opponent blew their entire hand on making that premature access code talker, and now they're suffering the consequences. Anyway, from this point it's a pretty easy OTK. I turned a Jenny into a Silent Magician, giving me a lot more attack, as well as a spell negate for next turn if my opponent somehow survived. After attacking twice, it really doesn't look like they'll have a response, so I just use Unveiling to summon a Ruru and then finish them up. So that should give you a decent impression on how to build and play Witchcrafters. Tell me if you decide to pick up the deck and how well you do with it. Special thanks to my tier 2 patrons Jason Moa and Violet Rain. The link to that is in the description. Thanks for watching!